Well, thank you very much. And I would really like to say with a big thank you to Sorbonne University, to the EUR, to the city of Paris, and to all the other groups from Sorbonne, from around the world who have helped me come to be here today and to be able to talk to you. Maybe a little disclaimer up front. I mean, I've lived in Paris for 5 years. My research topic was on the capital city, Paris. So I do have some knowledge of Paris. But in this audience, there are so many people who know much more about water in their specific rights than I do. And that's all why you're all here and why we will have all these roundtables inviting you to bring in all this specialized knowledge or this depth. Now, what I do hope that I can add to the mix is helping to connect these different perspectives, maybe bringing in an outsider perspective, and then helping hopefully to connect all the great work that's going on in Paris to places around the world. And I should perhaps start with the notion that I'm a big fan of what has happened in the last years in Paris. I've lived here in the 90s, and then I've come in between. So I'm really impressed and amazed what has been happening. So congratulations on this. We've been working for a couple of years on the topic of water and heritage, and I've been looking at it through the lens of different types of water. And I've tried to bring together different disciplines. I'm trained as an architect planner, but also historians, economists, anthropologists, all the different fields. So how can we make sure that this idea of water is getting much better connected? On the other hand, the idea is how can we bring these discussion to the professionals? When we are working with ministries, with the city, how do we get the knowledge from academia into the hands, and how do we create connections? So that's what I've been trying to invest in. And I had just here in front a little chair with the game we have and the blue books we have and the little lottos. So those are attempts to build conversations and to connect materials. So I'll hopefully oh, there they are. So that's what I was just looking for, and we can talk about them later. But first of all, I wanted to take you along into this journey because we've people here from the US, from Morocco, from other places, and not everybody maybe as familiar as you all are with the questions of Paris and how to connect what I would say are different water values. We've got people here who are all into swimming, but we've got also people here who talk for the ports. There are people who are interested in sewage and safety. And we have all of this related to this wonderful heritage of Paris as a city. So let me first take you along a bit into the way that I've been thinking about it. And as a good academic, I put up kind of the summary of what I'm going to be talking about. But let's keep it visual. And oh yes, maybe it's easier for you actually if you come back down, because then we have a bit more. Exactly. Thanks. So this was my experience of the Olympics in Paris. We had been very hesitant as a family to come here and to see. There's one more chair. So let's just get organized. This is the river at the heart of all the activities. Everything is taking place here. People are walking on over alongside the Seine, taking up all kinds of activities. What we've been working on for the last couple of years is to say that water has multiple functions. And what I often see happening is that the people who are in the shipping world think of water very differently than the people who are in the swimming world or in the safety world. And you could bring in the literature scholars, because even the ways people talk about water will change. Someone who looks at it from the port perspective may see it as dark or use different words than the person who's actually diving into the water, swimming into the water. With this background, we've developed a couple of icons, spatial approaches to water. And I think what's important for me is to say that all of these have a spatial impact. When we talk to economists, they will have the numbers. If we talk to people purely in technology, it may become physical, or if we talk to institutions. But I do think we have to think of water as being one, and yet being looked at in multiple ways. So these are just some of the icons that we developed here also with Leah and Susa here in the audience. to say these are some of the different functions that we bring together on the Seine. And then there are, and you can already see, we have shipping, swimming, sewage, safety, leisure, but we also have a number of intangible icons. So what is happening here in terms of institutions? What is happening in terms of policies, in terms of planning? But also, what's the role of heritage? And what I've really been impressed by over the last couple of years is how World Heritage has become an enabler for all the transformations that have been going on since the 1990s. Some of these, when we change what I'm calling water values, and we make swimming our goal, then all of a sudden shipping and sewage may be under pressure. And I think that's what the city had very much to deal with before the Olympics. But how do we make sure that we take everyone along? Now, we spent this weekend talking to Europa, talking to all kinds of industrial places. They are also just as important. And what I would like to start off our conference is to talk about some of these values, some of these different approaches to the water, and specifically 4 ones. But first I'm going to show you quickly. So these are the 20 that we've currently identified. There's also agriculture, there's energy. There are other ways of living with water. All of them probably can come into play on our discussion in the Seine too, whether we use chemical fertilizers in agriculture and we have runoff, or whether the ways we talk about heritage or about water will change, and each of them has its own spatial imprint. So what I'm saying here is I want to be swimming in the water. I have to be able to get to the water and touch it. I have to get a ladder and come up and down. If I want to have the river purely as a sewage pipe, I can put up a huge wall, and we see that everywhere, and I don't care anymore. So however we engage with the river has specific spatial, social, institutional, cultural implications. So you can think about a landscape of being about these different water values and their engagement with each other. It's almost like a water grammar that we need and that spells out in these different connections. Now, for the purpose of this morning, we've selected also with Laurence, he's here, these 4 issues to be mainly focusing on. So swimming, shipping, sewage, and safety. And safety in the sense of how do we prevent flood control. And these 4 ones are playing out in different ways in terms of heritage. So Jyoti already introduced kindly the historic urban landscape approach, UNESCO, and talked about the role of heritage. Now, heritage is in the middle of all of these discussions, and yet it is often not as visible as personally I think it should be. On the one hand, it has been an enabler to get the highways out of the center of Paris, and it is an enabler for the Olympics. It is really at the heart of many of the things happening here, but it's also under pressure. And we do need to understand what its potential is for nature-based solutions, but also what the challenges are of water on these sites. And there we will get into that. Just think about flooding through water of the basements of the major institutions in the city. So let me just take you along, and this is also meant for the foreign visitors here, Paris. And I've tried to convince my students that Paris is a port city. Everybody talks about Paris, capital city, city of love, and you name it. But when you say Paris, port city, people go, huh? Well, it is a port city, and it's at the origin a port city. Just go to the mayor's office and see all these nice chairs there. Fluctuat nec mergitur. That's the motto of the city. This is the language we use to describe Paris. This is the way the city grew. This is how building materials were shipped into the city. And that's what they can still be today. The river is a major transportation device. So if you want to keep the trucks out of the city center, well, that's one way to do it. And I'll show you a couple more examples. I challenge all of you to find these ships everywhere throughout the city. I used to take my kids into the Louvre and tell them find all the dogs, or in Venice find all the lions. But I do think it might be a really nice challenge to ask people to find all the ships throughout Paris that speak to this issue of Paris Port City. And since we are on this beautiful island, this is what I kept on seeing walking here in the morning. It's a city that is a major shipping corridor. There are all kinds of goods going through the city, building materials, grains. Grains were a big thing that had to be stopped for the Olympics. There are, I can show you more, there's debris. There are debris is going back and forth through the city. So this notion of being this key port city being crossed, and I just made 3 films just to get the proof here that this is really happening and happening all the time. We tend to mostly speak of the tourist ships, but we often forget that these are the ships going through. So if we want to be swimming, and I'm all for swimming, that's not the problem, we do have to find a way to engage with them. The fancy or the fascinating thing for me about Paris is that they have a different definition of ports. A port in Paris is from one bridge to the other. And I recently talked to someone from Voies Navigables de France who could really draw up all the, 75 ports of Paris on a map out of the top of their head. There is a notion of heritage in the recognition of ports, what ports are, in the way they shape the future, and in the way they can be reimagined. And what happened recently is the AIVP special mention of the Antoine Ruffenac Prize was given to this port in Paris, the Javel-Bas port. And I think this is a huge innovation in the field of port city thinking, because this is a working port in the 15th arrondissement in Paris, which has been reimagined to be multifunctional, to have public spaces. It's well used. You can go alongside the river, and it has retractable borders. So when a ship comes, it's getting closed. For the rest of the time, you can run around there. It has buildings on stilts. So there's a lot of innovation going on in the port city Paris field that is really inspiring. Now, there are many more sites to come, or even the fact I mentioned before that goods are being shipped over the river. IKEA is shipping in aluminium containers into the city at night. So on the one hand, we should be talking about multifunctional spaces, but we also talk about multi-temporalities. I think the swimmers will be in the water at the day, and then shipping can occur at night. There's also danger of it getting too crowded, as Franprix and others are finding the same routes. But I do think there's a lot of inspiration for heritage in this, because the quays have been built for shipping. Goods have been brought into the city for shipping. The charpentes, the roofs of the Notre Dame cathedral rebuilding were brought in via the river into the city. So take the shipping heritage of Paris seriously and use the river and the quays as a cultural heritage for the purpose of shipping. That will help us get the trucks out of the city, or make them, like with IKEA, the lightweight trucks. So this was just a quick reminder to say, why does shipping matter for Paris, and why should we be taking it seriously? Now, let's take a quick look at swimming. And we've heard already quite a bit about swimming, and I won't make it quite that long. But if we see swimming, we should think about the culture of who swims when. So we went through the Museum Carnavalet, and you see people jousting on boats and pushing each other into the water. You see women washing clothes. Swimming as a leisure activity was not that long. So there might be a really nice study that Laurence might know that I don't know yet, when that really started. But we do have a long history of swimming boats in the Seine, so of cooling down in the water or swimming in the Seine further downstream, among others. But what we are seeing now really goes back to Paris Plage, when the city decided to put sand on the main highways in the city center and have it a leisure activity in the month of August, and it worked. And changing these ideas, these minds, these values of the citizens, was an amazing feat. And I would say there were so many imitations of Paris Plage, Brussels Plage, and you name it, but none of them stuck in the way that it did in Paris. And I think that's one of the amazing feats that Paris can do. It keeps the direction going. There is a decision, there's money invested, and we build on something like Paris Plage over 20 years to keep a direction and to keep this impact going. Now, when we look at pools, we can see the Josephine Baker pool. There we have chlorine water in front of the water, but at least you're swimming in it. The next pool will be just outside here. This is the place where Madame Hidalgo also went swimming. So there will be 3 swimming pools built. We'll hear more about all of them during those 2 days. But what I found interesting, still in the same spot here, the same place where all of those ships go past, well, we see people swimming. And I do guess these are the firemen who are training here every day, but you can see it. And when we talk to the port people, we also heard that there's a lot of people jumping from bridges, which is not allowed and which we shouldn't be doing. And we do find throughout the city, also on the canals, all these signs of do not swim, do not bathe. And why? So one of the things, if we reimagine the city, we need to have places where people can actually get in and out of the water. So if people start swimming, well, fine, you can fall into the water pretty easily. It's much more difficult to get out. And the question of the conflict with the ports then arises, because you don't want to have a 150-meter long boat coming down at you if it can't stop. So it will mean, and that gets us also back into the theme of heritage, if you put more bigger pillars into the water to stop the boats, how will they look? If you put no new stairs in to climb out of the water, how will they look? How will you integrate them into the World Heritage Site? And here we have a really interesting Canal Saint-Martin, so this is not the Seine, but we have a really interesting question in terms of how are we going to negotiate between these different interests of heritage, of citizens wanting to base, of shipping, of swimming, and so on. So that's what gets me into the question then of sewage. So we've been talking already of 2 functions of sewage, and many rivers around the world were basically the sewage pipes. Paris had drinking water first, it built its sewage system, but its sewage system in itself is a heritage object. There were a lot of unique decisions made in Paris to get the dirty water into the Seine. That's where it went in the beginning. And later on to collect and revitalize it. So when we look at the sewage system in Paris, with these manholes that are quite unique, very different from what's happening in London or in other places, we also have the Sewage Museum, which is quite impressive, where the last exhibition on swimming in the Seine was actually being held. So I didn't want to show you much of the films of the Sewage Museum, but you can see that the river starts anywhere already in these kinds of images. You have in Paris the access to the water right on the edges of the border. You could even look into something like this, where you see the streets being cleaned nicely every day. So this is much more nicer to look at than the Musée des Égouts. But it's a very important experience. But you do see that cleanup, water, urban runoff goes into the water at any location throughout the city. So how are we dealing with the heritage of sewage? How are we integrating it in it? And sewage heritage is much more difficult to love. It's just not easy to get people. Swimming is easy, shipping can be easier, but sewage is really difficult to love, and yet it is the foundation for everything it's where the historic buildings, it's where the historic sites are completely embedded. Now, the last topic that we want to talk about in the conference is to say, what about safety? And safety is an interesting one to understand the Seine, because the Seine go to Musée Carnavalet, you see the historic images, the Seine almost has no water. Shipping will be in trouble if there's no water. Tourist boats will be in trouble if there's no water. And as I understand it, the control of the Seine is about getting always enough water in, but it's not protected against flooding, which in the Netherlands is much more perhaps a spread out discussion. So we see that if we look at the Paris flood, that much of the areas where all the World Heritage Site sits is floodable. So how do we protect? If we benefit for all of these reasons from heritage, how will we protect it against the big floods coming? And most recently, we did have quite a browny looking Seine almost up to the borders. And this is just across here where you see the Ganguette. So just giving you this kind of idea of what the dangers are. What if all these areas floods? How do we bring these various ideas together, and how do we integrate this with the idea of heritage? Now, as I said before, I do think that the city has done a great attention to what I would call values. And when we're dealing with values, let's keep in mind that they are multiple, they are diverse. There's not one value. If I asked you what value are we going for, the shipping world may go for a different value than the swimming world, etc. Some people may go for sustainability, for biodiversity, and you go on. Now, with the Procès fictif de la Seine, I think we had, so this was a process made, what if we give the River of Paris legal personality? That was a beautiful attempt to bring biodiversity to the front. But Elisabeth made the point earlier also, the river is a natural site which created cultural heritage. And one of the elements that I was left wanting a bit after this event was, well, so what about cultural heritage then? The river in Paris is no longer purely natural. We have created a cultural site with the walls. So I would be love to engage with you on that one. So what do we do with it? And the other question that would be really neat to be discussing further is, what about the Bièvre then? So should we also bring the Bièvre back? So for all of the ones in the room who don't know this is the second river of Paris, which has been basically built over. There's buildings on top of it. It came into the Seine just about there. Now then it moved over, so these were all wetlands. And the Bièvre now looks something like this. So the question is, how far do we go with this engagement? How far do we take these discussions? And I do think these are elements where academic reflection, connections, hopefully can help get people along to decide what do we want. So this is kind of the approach that I've been taking towards Paris, try to organize with the idea we've been developing over years on water values and how to create up with a value case approach. And what we mean with a value case approach is to say we no longer want a business case approach, so only economic numbers, but what role does culture play? And if we see the great transformations having taken place in Paris, it's about a new culture, it's a new way of thinking, it's a different way of values. It's putting, if I put swimming at the front, water needs to be clean enough almost to drink. Water needs to respect the animals. I cannot do it anymore as sewage. Sewage has to change, had changed in Paris. Shipping has to change. We need to come up with different vehicles. We need to come up with different approaches. By saying this, so what we've been working on for the last years is to say, in this value case approach, how can we assess different values, making them spatial, so multi-scalar, multi-stakeholder, and also value-based? And how do we connect this to the UN SDGs? So the idea is, if we have a landscape that is layered, we have a natural river on top of it, we build culture, we build institutions, we develop these values, this evolves over time and leaving us with a choice of this becomes heritage and something else we want to get rid of. So the way I've been trying to systematize this is to say, what can we learn from the past? And this is always the big discussions when I'm talking to water people who will say, yes, well, we need new solutions. Well, but what do we do with the past and how do we link to it? And there's, yes, the past is inspirational. Yes, but how? How do you get inspired from it? So on the one hand, for me, we can say, and Jyoti referred to this too, there's so many ecosystems in the past where beautiful, complete, complex water systems were developed, and we can learn from how these were put together. This doesn't mean that we necessarily want to repeat them. Some of these systems, think even about the Qanat, which is these underground water structures in Iran and Northern Africa. Well, maybe you had people who had to go into there, or you have people in Africa, women and children carrying water on their heads. So we may not want to repeat all the ecosystems of the past, but we can learn from the ways they were put together and then make decision what we want to keep. There are all decisions that have been made that we do not want to repeat. So there again, history can be helpful to say this is what we want to avoid. But history also comes into play to say which is the heritage that we actually want to preserve and why. And if we have world heritage, we as the world have decided to preserve it. So let's make sure that this also becomes possible. So then you have different sectors, the water sector, the culture sector, etc., who need to be able to talk to each other and adopt the same kind of values. So with this value case approach, we've been working on different tools and methodologies. How can we embed this value understanding in space around different personas? If we ask the river Seine, a grain of sand in the river, how does it see the Seine? If we ask the salmon, if we ask different, how do we actually get to a larger understanding of it? And then to say, what role would the SDGs play in this discussion? So if we take the SDGs, we always think about something that can be, or that should be realized in the next 10 until 2030 and beyond. But for me, the SDGs are really about ecosystem thinking, which is also where they come from. If we start with water, and we have SDG 6, drinking water, sewage water. And then I was talking to people in the shipping world, and they always said to me, well, we're on the wrong water. Our water isn't there in the SDGs. Well, that's not true. Well, the SDGs just highlight one aspect, but they are much more broad. And then on the other hand, when we talk to the ports, they might say, well, we have all these SDGs that we promote, economy, etc., but they don't look into life below sea, SDG 14. Well, how is it possible that a port that depends on water depth does not think about life below water? So if we go back and try to bring these water values into a bigger picture, let's say there's a much bigger water, which is partly on land. It depends on energy and climate, which are our frameworks. And over time, we've always looked into individual benefits, community benefits, but whatever we do, it depended on cultural practices and values. So these decisions that we make should then get us into the future design. What are we going to, so all this analysis that we've seen, how do we develop that into a future project like the one that Paris has been working on? So this, and what is the task in some ways of the chair that I'm holding here, is to say, well, let's bring this value case approach to Paris. And we've been working here with Leah in particular on trying to map all the various stakeholders around a swimmer, or to map stakeholders around the shipping on the Seine, and to develop timelines. And here Laurence's work with the fresque has been a big inspiration to see what are the key values that have been developed, that have shaped the Seine over time, and what are the values today, and what values can you link back to in your story. So it's also about telling a convincing story on behalf of the city to say, well, we need shipping. We can't forget about it. Otherwise this, but it can also be another added future potential value for and engaging with swimming. And that is something where other countries, so there's a big European grant where the Netherlands, the Rijkswaterstaat has been leading, which is called Connected River, where we see around various cities the conflict between people wanting to go back to water, swimming, supping, canoeing, kayaking, you name it. They go on the water, but they don't know what they're doing. Either they conflict with shipping, etc., creating security issues, okay, but then we need to negotiate them, or even creating an issue for nature itself, because it doesn't mean that we that the river may always want us. I had this nice conversation with the people of the Parlement de la Loire. Do we really want, I'm going to say, dirty humans with sunscreen and all this stuff in the river at all times, disturbing the birds, etc.? So even in the field of swimming, we might want to think about what exactly are the values that drive us. Now, with this in mind, and I already gave you a little insight of these before, we've been working on these various connections and toolboxes, like the water values game, to create awareness on the different layers of the landscape, the culture, and the interventions of professional courses and of the blue papers that I mentioned to you to make this connection. I would love at the end of the conference, during my stay here, to have an engagement around the game, to develop a blue paper purely for Paris on this topic, so that we can bring together this multifunctional, multidisciplinary approach and use it to show how Paris has been leading this reconnection with the river, what are the challenges, the opportunities, and to bring that kind of discussion then to other great cities around the world where the same issues are occurring. Now, I want to make two quick more points, and then I'll come back to them tomorrow afternoon to go more in depth on them. So what are the tools that we can use to bring in World Heritage, to bring in musea, to facilitate this approach to water, to the river, as a multidisciplinary, as a multifunctional one? On the one hand, we have the Water Museum Network, which is a network of 200 musea. Ellen is here somewhere. I don't see you right now. There's Ellen from the Philadelphia Waterworks, one of the members of the museum, and the Musée de l'Égout is also one of the members. They tell a story about water. They tell different stories about water, drinking water in Philadelphia, sewage water. What if we took these museums in their line around rivers and made connections for and among them? So they developed a tool, a taxonomy, to link water institutions along a river. And we made now for Paris, so we made one for the Netherlands to say, what are the cultural institutions along a river? How could they be telling a shared story to create more awareness of the river? So that's one tool that is out there that's being promoted. So you could imagine the Musée de l'Égout speak to the Louvre, speak to Musée Carnavalet and others, and have shared stories along the river in line with the kind of events you're proposing here, because the paintings are there. Take one from the Carnavalet, create it into a kind of educational journey along the Seine. So this is, Sousa has been putting a lot of effort into putting it all together for Paris. So this could be a nice walk. And this links nicely to what the World Heritage Center has been doing, and Jyoti started talking about, and will explain it further, with the Atlas, because the Musée de l'Égout, the sewage museum in Paris, is actually located within the World Heritage area. So raising all these questions, what are the opportunities and challenges for heritage in the zone, could nicely be connected to this kind of conversation. And this is where we're now launching, as of today, I hope, the contribution for Paris to the Urban Heritage Atlas. So those are kind of the things I've been doing here as the chair. And then to end with, all of these are opportunities for design. So the kind of analysis that I showed you is to say, how can we reconceptualize the relation between water and water, ports, and historic cities? We've made an atlas on seaports. We're now working on an atlas on river ports to see how the shipping, sewage, all of these things at multiple scales are engaged. For example, on the scale of the coasts, most of the World Heritage Centers are also still working coastal cities. And then for architects, this might mean, how can we reconceptualize water, not just from source to sea, but everywhere, in the air, in the ground, in the pipes? and what kind of new grammar of water objects could we develop. So this was student work done last year, where they photographed different water elements, translated them into a grammar, and then developed architectural objects related to it. And the point that I'm usually making to my students in design is to say, in the past, we had in the Netherlands socialist municipalities. We have housing where we showed we are really very much engaged in helping the working class population. And those of you who've been to Amsterdam or Hamburg or other cities, Vienna is a good example. I'm looking at you, the Karl Marx Hof, a kilometer-long structure for housing, and the city stands for it. What is the water architecture that could really support the great story that Paris is telling? So I've started to take pictures of all kinds of water elements throughout the city, but turn that into a whole story that can support swimming, shipping, sewage, and the health of the River Seine. So that would be what I'm hoping to give you from history to the present and to the future. Thank you very much.